Thank you, Chairman Tonko. Today's hearing is the 7th hearing in the committee's work to achieve a 100% clean economy by 2050. So far, we've examined ways to decarbonize specific sectors of the U.S. economy, including the electricity sector, buildings, transportation, and heavy industry. And we also discussed the impact of climate change on frontline communities. Throughout these hearings, witnesses told us that we need sector-specific solutions for climate action, especially in sectors that are more difficult to decarbonize. But they also repeatedly pointed to the need for an economy-wide measures to ensure we cut pollution across all sectors. So today we'll explore these cross-cutting mechanisms and the role they should play in addressing the climate crisis. This hearing couldn't come at a more important time. As we speak, world leaders are meeting in Madrid for the 25th Conference of the Parties to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, or COP25. President Trump is noticeably absent from the summit. This is the same president who just 1 month ago started the formal process of withdrawing the United States from the Paris Agreement. And if President Trump gets his way, we will be the only country to oppose and abandon the Paris Agreement. Now, I had the privilege to travel to COP25 in Madrid with a bicameral congressional delegation, which included Representatives Castor, Peters, and Dingell from our committee. And on our visit, we reminded world leaders and activists that despite President Trump's retreat from this global crisis, that we're still in. And they made it clear they were grateful that someone was there to represent the United States because our leadership is so important. Our continued commitment to the Paris Agreement is more important than ever. New information comes out each week stressing the urgent need for climate action. Just last week, for instance, the United Nations released its annual emissions gap report showing the divergence between current emissions projections and the reductions needed to avoid catastrophic climate change. The report warned that we're on track to miss those targets, and not just by an inch, but by a mile. The Paris Agreement adopted the science-based target of limiting warming to 1.5 to 2 degrees Celsius by 2100. The UN report, however, warned that we're heading towards 3.9 degrees of warming by the end of the century. So think about that for a moment, that's almost double the limit needed to avoid the most damaging consequences of climate change. Not meeting these targets would have devastating consequences. It would lead to increasingly frequent extreme weather events, more damaging wildfires, rapid sea level rise, more persistent flooding and droughts, threats to entire ecosystems and food supplies, and countless other hazards. Meanwhile, there was a report by the Global Carbon Project released just yesterday that showed that carbon dioxide emissions would hit an all-time high this year. And on Tuesday, the World Meteorological Organization reported that 2019 will be the second or third hottest year ever recorded. And these are startling trends, but if there's one thing I learned in Madrid, is that this is not a time for despair. It's time for bold leadership and ambitious action. One of the key reasons that the rest of the world is not meeting these targets is because of a lack of leadership they're seeing right now from the Trump administration. And we heard over and over again that if the United States withdraws and doesn't participate in the future, the other countries are not likely to go along because U.S. leadership is what most countries look at. And that's why we have to continue to exercise that leadership. And it's also why this committee is hard at working in developing our proposal to reach net zero emissions by 2050. I think this is the consensus from the scientific community on what we have to do to avoid the worst impacts of climate change. So today we're going to hear about options for robust, comprehensive, and economy-wide policy solutions to hit that target. We'll hear about the essential role the federal government can play. And again, if I can go back to the weekend conference, I think that everyone knows that the state and the local governments continue to play a major role and can do a lot of the things that we need to do to reach the target of 2050, but it's not enough. The federal government has to get involved. So finally, we're going to hear about how economy-wide climate action will not only reduce emissions, but will also stimulate the economy. By investing in the low and zero carbon technologies of the future, the U.S. can become a world leader in clean energy innovation. And I look forward to hearing from our witnesses about that. And thank you again, Chairman Tonko, and I yield back.